So hi everybody. I think you all know who I am, Steve. Thanks very
Hmm.
much for coming along to tonight's session. Just a few bits of housekeeping for those of you that have just arrived. As we're going through the presentation tonight, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, or Ben will be stopping periodically, so you could just unmute yourself and ask. This is a meeting rather than a webinar. So if you're happy to just ask yourself. If you want to put it in the chat, I'll ask on your behalf. So just to introduce Ben, Ben's an old friend of mine. We went to college together. I've known him for a good few years. He's based up in Scotland. He's had a lifetime of experience in and around the water, and especially inland waters. Runs a large canyoning adventure company in Fort William. And delivers guide training and water safety training all over the world. So thank you very much, Ben, for coming along to offer to do this session tonight. I'll hand over to you, and that's it. Thank you.
Cheers, Steve. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. If anyone's got any questions throughout, then feel free to. I think Steve will probably keep an eye on that chat with you, Steve, and then you can sort of ask or whatever. But feel free to unmute if you want. I've not done. I kind of thought this would be a nice little add-on to what Steve was doing with the course and Norma. So I asked if anyone was interested, and so I've kind of put the course together, or tonight's lecture together, from a lot of different areas of some of the things that I already teach. So not sure how long it'll last or anything. It's a bit of a trial run, but hopefully everyone will get something from it. So Steve's already introduced me. I've basically been in a river most days for the last 35 years. So or the sea or a lake. So either teaching or enjoying myself, and I just love getting in the water, dependent, on any kind of toy, or just in a wetsuit or in my shorts. So quite a lot of the content in the lectures is based around rivers. So if anyone's got any questions about sort of lakes or reservoirs, then or locks and canals, and ask away. But I thought that, ultimately, I think that if people are entering the river, then there's probably more content based around that than there is in flat water. Having given the background of what you've already been through with the lectures with Steve and such like of the sea. So I'll get going. I'm just gonna close this down. Excellent. So I was just sort of thinking about, swimming in the river, and a lot of the time that I'm teaching rescue personnel or river kayakers, or people who are entering the water. So from a swimming point of view, we need to think about, how we're going to size up our safety. And so obviously every time we get near the water, or we're going to enter the water, think about a swim, we need to think about, what's the benefit, and size that up, in terms of how much risk there is and what's the risk to us. So things that we should be thinking about with our size up is the location. How far away are we from a certain area? In terms of safety, in terms of distance from help or our vehicle, and then sort of size up and think about, how, the water temperature, and what hazards there are, how we're going to get into the water, etc. So that kind of comes onto our planning, and when we're planning the swim. So
not moving on, Ben. There
we go. Okay. So firstly, when we're planning, we obviously need to think about who knows where we're going, and and whether or not we've got a buddy. Yeah. So whereabouts are we going to be? And obviously making sure that we leave that that message with the right person. how far from help am I, and how far from help am I going to end up? And certainly with a river swim, we could put in some quite decent distance. And on that, throughout that journey, we might be thinking about, how far away are we from different points of help on that journey, or are we going through any kind of gorges or anywhere that's a bit more remote, and certainly leaving a bit of a route plan as to where we're going on the way. That'd be good. Do we have a constant phone signal throughout our journey, and have we checked that? So certainly if we're planning a journey down a river, then we probably walk that journey first, and we can check things like hazards on the way, and we can check to see if there's a phone signal throughout the journey. Yeah. What equipment do we need, and what equipment do we have, is we're going to talk about shortly. Am I going on my own, or am I with a buddy? And certainly that's a bit of a bone of contention with this kind of swimming in a river, or where are we going to end up, and is there someone there for rescue? Yeah, so I think that's something that's up to you as to whether or not you decide whether or not you want to be on your own or with a buddy. Certainly every time I go for a swim, I try and have somebody there, but also if you're planning a nice safe swim on a warmer day, then it's sometimes quite nice just to have a bit of peace, isn't it, and go for a little wild swim in the middle of nowhere. So that's part of our serenity and mindfulness when we're out in the wilderness, having a dunk. We need to think about who's with us and whether or not that's something that we want or not. But if we do have a buddy, you think about their sort of equipment that they've got, and whether you're taking the rescue equipment with you, and whether or not you can use that rescue equipment, or whether the buddy can use that rescue equipment is pretty important. Yeah, so things like a throw line or a reach pole or a big rubber ring, all of these things require an element of skill, and making that rescue happen is something that you need to train to do, rather than it just being a piece of equipment that's stowed. Yeah.
Ben, can I just ask, sorry, when you're talking about rescue equipment, you might come on to this, but what sort of thing do you take when you're going for a swim if you're just going with a couple of mates?
It would depend on the venue, and certainly I would say that the majority of the time, if we're swimming in, I will come on to it, but when we're talking about swimming in a river, then we need to think about flotation. So we'll talk about that when we come on to hydrology shortly, and how the aeration of the water will affect your own personal buoyancy, and the different kinds of flow can affect your buoyancy as well. So having buoyancy on can be a massive advantage and peace of mind, especially if you're on your own. I think having a throw bag on the riverbank is a good idea, obviously, but because it's a good rescue tool. However, it's only a good rescue tool if you've practiced with it, and it's only a good rescue tool if the person you're throwing it at knows how to receive that rope, and so it's not really a tool that you can use just for the public, for instance. So it's definitely a skilled item of rescue. Yeah, I think, well, we'll come on to it shortly when I talk about it. So yeah, something to think about, we'll talk about as well, is hazmat issues. So any hazardous materials that are in the water, and I would say that every lowland river in the UK is polluted. There's no river, and quite a lot of the highland rivers as well are polluted. So it's certainly something to bear in mind and think about every time you get in the water, as to how you're going to deal with that, and make sure that you're prepared for for anything that could be an issue. So we'll come on to those things as well, how to recognize them and spot them. So, with this in mind, if we're planning our river swim, we also need to think about, the journey on its way. We're looking at the hazards, but if there does become any moving white water, then whenever we've got white water, we've got aeration, and the aeration's been created by gradient and obstacles in the river, which create features. So if there is white water, then that's, a big danger to us as swimmers, and we need to manage that. And we're going to come on to hazards shortly. Hazards are in the river. Excuse me, just give me a second. The dishwasher's so noisy. There we go. So I've got there, have I changed my plan? So certainly something that we kind of quite often happens. You might go out and say, on your trip, I'm just going to go to the Findhorn and I'm going to have a quick swim at Randolph Sleep. And then, for some reason you get to Randolph Sleep and it's like, oh, there's a load of guys there drinking cans of beer, and that's not the planned the swim that you had. So you change your mind and you move to a different venue. And certainly if you're going to do that and you don't have a buddy, then, being mindful about leaving messages is really important, so go back to that. Have I got a phone signal, and who knows where I'm going? And that route card that we put in at the start is pretty critical. So if you've got a dynamic plan, then make sure that you inform somebody of where you're going to be, and that you've changed your mind and they know where you are. And I think things like, whenever I go out, I use my Garmin watch. It links to my InReach, which I can talk about. But that's a more advanced kind of way of tracking, but there are lots of ways of tracking now. Even just find me on your mobile phone is a fantastic option, or just sharing your location on WhatsApp with a few friends when you go for your swim. Certainly in the river, unless you're wearing a wetsuit, if you're not going to be spending lots of time in there anyway, so it's not going to be an issue in terms of data and stuff like that, really. So certainly a good thing to do. Great. So there's a couple of things that we need to think about when we size up our venue. So we've got a couple of slides there, and completely different in nature, aren't they? We've got somebody there being throw-bagged in some white water, and then below there we've got a lovely waterfall with a nice pool at the bottom. Certainly two nice places that you'd consider swimming. So what's going through our mind in terms of what do we need to do before we turn up, before we enter the water? And certainly, first thing is about access, isn't it? So we need to think about, what's our access like? How are we going to get into the water? And certainly if it's cold water, we've already talked about cold shock and how that affects us. And cold water incapacitation, gasp reflex, all of those things. So thinking about access, we need to be thinking about that we're not kind of just jumping in the river. We want to be wading in slowly, and certainly the river can, quite often is a lot colder than the ocean. And certainly depending on the gradient, there'll be, it can be that the water is the same temperature as, the clouds if they're and if they're falling as, if the water's falling high in the mountains and coming down quickly, it'll be, just above freezing level. So just bear that in mind, whereas the oceans tends to be a lot warmer. So access, nice shale banks, and shale beaches, and slower moving water is ideal for getting in. Yeah. And we also want to think about the morphology underneath the riverbed. So a lot of our rivers in the UK, they're quite black in nature, and it's quite hard to see underneath the water. So think about, maybe taking a pole with you. A wading pole can be really handy, and you can, probe and feel for depth. And what you don't want to be doing is sort of walking in and then getting out of your depth and ending up gasping, especially if there's, any kind of flow. You want to be in a controlled environment while you get to sort of your full I guess, swimming ability and get over any cold shock before you then set off on your swim. So planning the egress before you actually get in is really important as well. So am I getting out in the same place? And if I do swim out, can I actually get back to the same place? You know, am I just going to get taken with the current, which obviously there's not a problem with that, but unless you need to get back to the same place. So I would be thinking about, for instance, the top of a gorge or something like that, where you get in the water and then you get taken down through the gorge, and the only option for egress is at the end of the gorge, or walled in area. So just look at your possibilities. And a gorge doesn't need to be a really steep, rocky, kind of cliffy area. It could be, you know, a canal, which has got, you know, really steep banks. Some reservoirs, again, they've got really steep banks and can be hard to get out of as well. Yeah, some urban environments as well. Urban rivers have, you know, walled out areas, so we need to be careful of. Cool. Talked about temperature already. Yeah. So very shortly we'll come on to sort of hazards and looking at hazards in terms of hydrology and what hazards we end up within the river. But we also need to think about how we avoid them, you know, and it might be that they're too dangerous to go near, so we just don't get in that area. It might be that we need to look at the flow and the direction of the flow and what we call the current vector, and decide, you know, whether or not the flow is taking us into the hazard, or whether we can swim out of the way of the flow. Or is it just, you know, I can see the hazard, but the flow is actually taking us away from the hazard. So just looking at the hydrology in relation to the hazard, and whether or not we're going to get swept into that hazard is the main thing. And that takes a bit of time to understand, and to be able to do, certainly a lot longer than an hour that we've got. This is something that's really important, isn't it? And I'm sure that Steve and Norma will be the same. You know, you get to a site and you get familiar with the site, and certainly with a river and the ocean, it's always changing, isn't it? We've talked about rip currents, we've talked about tides, and we've talked about this, you know, the wind and the ocean, and certainly in the river, and we have varying different states of river, don't we? And certainly a river in spate is completely different to a river that's not, you know, or in flood. Yeah, so and there's obviously all sorts of different states of river flow within, you know, between flood and low water that we need to kind of be familiar with. So having known a site and being familiar with it, it can be great, because you know where all the features are and the hazards, but you can also get quite complacent with it as well. And some days you can go there and it can be completely different. And you might think, oh, it's okay, it was okay last time, it's only a little bit higher than we were here last, but it actually can be, you know, completely different when you enter the water. And it's certainly something to be, you know, careful about. So we can get information on the water levels. We're quite lucky now because we've got water gauges. SEPA have the water gauges on their website, and so do DEFRA. So we, in the environmental agencies, so we can look at those water levels, and we can get like base level readings, and then we can get whether or not the river's in spate or in flood. And that can be quite good for our size up and our planning, because if we know that the river's in flood, we don't want to go anywhere near it. The river will be up out of the banks, and it'll be washing through all the trees at the side, and all of our, you know, it'll be moving a lot faster, and it'll be carrying debris and silt. So the river will be just, you know, not a place to go for a swim. And we have to remember that, you know, normally, and you can see from this slide, we're teaching rescue personnel, and they'd be turning up to a flood, so we'd be teaching them to be able to deal with that flood water. But we're going for a recreational swim that's supposed to be fun, so we don't need to bother with that. We can go somewhere else, go in the sea or in the swimming pool. Yeah. So when I go swimming in the river, I've been caught out by after drop a few times, and I've spent quite a lot of time in cold water swimming, especially through COVID. I got really into it. I was really enjoying it, but did get some pretty bad internal cramps and stuff from after drop. So I actually started timing my swim now. So if I'm just going in my shorts, I set an alarm, and then I can enjoy the swim. And I know that I've got like a minute before, after my alarm goes off, so that I can get out, and then I can get re-warmed and enjoy that whole experience without driving home shaking like a road vibrator to try and get into a hot shower for however long it takes me to re-warm. So it's just a little trick that I do. It's just to set an alarm.
Ben, just had a question that came through from Catherine. Just do you consider any risks in fresh water, specifically from things like bugs and leeches and that sort of thing? And if so, how do you manage that?
Yeah, there are certainly, and it's a whole section that I've got on this slides coming up.
Okay.
So, yeah, so those will be answered shortly. Yeah, great.
Okay, thanks
for that. Just a little example of, the same river in terms of size up here. There's the kids having a swim. Egress and access quite tricky, steep wall banks, and good fun, but very dark water, and kids love to jump in, so hard to see what's subsurface. So good inspection and on entry is really important. And we can see that we've got this line of scum, and that can be a good telltale. Normally if we've got this, then that will have come from a rapid, and that scum is actually, it's just a bacteria in the water which creates this foam. Sometimes it can be like really, really funny. It can be really high, and a couple of foot high. You can get in, swimming amongst it, and it's harmless enough. But it's because the water's been agitated. So if there's a chance that the water's been agitated somewhere, then obviously further down in the river there are rapids to consider and flow. So it's come from somewhere. And this is further down, obviously on a different day, but it's this is the Findhorn, part of the Findhorn Gorge. It's one of my local rivers. Completely different in nature, isn't it? On that day, and certainly the river Findhorn is known to flash flood. We get walls of water coming down the river, so it can come up like a meter in 10 minutes. So certainly planning your trip and planning your swim around the weather as well, and forecasting the weather is really important. So thinking about, okay, what's in the catchment area at the moment, certainly at this time of year in April, where we've got potentially got a lot of snow in the higher mountains. If we have a warm hot day and we get rain in the catchment area, which can be 50 miles away, then that can bring this river up quite dramatically. So knowing your venue and having an idea of that is critical. Likewise, we also get flash floods from other things like reservoir releases and natural dams as well. And certainly, knowing what's upstream in the catchment area is critical for that as well. So if there's any chance that the river could release, and nearly most of the rivers in Scotland are dammed, and quite a lot in North Wales. And then some of the bigger rivers like the Severn and the Thames have all got weirs and dams on them that control the flow for drinking water, etc. So the river levels can change unpredictably, not just because of the weather, because humans can change it. So just be mindful of that. Cool. So just a couple of rules of the road. Yeah. Think about, you swim, and I like to say, keep it simple. It's only for fun. Yeah. If we're thinking, we're going to go out, well, have we got a throw bag on them? Have we got this? And have we got buoyancy aids? And do we need helmets and all of this extra equipment? Then maybe we're not just going for a swim. Maybe we're doing a different activity. Maybe it's a gorge walk, or maybe it's that. And maybe that's what you want to do. But remember to work within your capability of your own expertise and what you've got. So just keep it as simple as you can. If there's a hard place to get in, go and find an easier place to get in. If it looks hard to get out, don't get in the first place. Find an easier place where you can get out. Yeah. And just keeping it simple is really it's just, yeah, simple, isn't it? It's just important. Yeah. And everyone's going to swim at a different level, aren't they, and have different experiences. And we all, experience an ability of fitness, and and what they're comfortable with. And one person's comfort level will be, will be completely different to another's. So just, work within your capabilities and what you're happy with, and also what you feel you can, you can do. And if you, what I would say is the river's relentless. It will never give up. And your muscles aren't. So it's, in the ocean and in lakes, if you get tired, you can just lay there and chill out. You can't really do that in the river. You need to find shelter. And if you don't have the energy to get to that shelter, then you're going to get swept away and swept off downstream. So just, think about your own ability and your own energy levels, what's right for you on the day in terms of what PPE you've got on and what you're wearing. And certainly, the cold has a massive effect on you. So if you're going for, a swim in just in your shorts, then your ability and to swim obviously is going to be completely different to what it would be in a wetsuit, for instance, over what it would be in a dry suit. So, yeah, think about your PPE. Think about what's appropriate. Do you like that picture I got of you, Steve?
Yeah, that wasn't very long ago, was it?
No, I think that was when you were at college.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. So depending on the swim you're going to do will depend on the remoteness of and what equipment you need. And there's certainly some, bits of kit that are really, really helpful, and really handy. So I've already talked about an InReach. It's a GPS transmitter. You can send out an SOS with that, as long as you've got kind of a little bit of open sky above your head. So it kind of works pretty much everywhere apart from really tight, narrow gorges like canyons, or inside houses. It's a great bit of kit. It's very small. Put it in a waterproof case and it won't fail. And the battery lasts ages, and you can message with it as well. So if you're going somewhere really remote, or somewhere where you've not got a phone signal, then the InReach or a Spot, there's other brands, but they are really good, and work well. An example of this, recently I teach water rescue to all the Bristow helicopter winchmen. So they're coming to us for a 1-week course on water safety and rescue. And they were searching on Sky for a guy who'd been missing for 48 hours. And he'd actually broken his femur. And they had no idea where he was because he didn't have a phone signal. And the only way that they knew that he was in a certain area was because they managed to get his iCloud login and look at the photos that have been uploaded to his iCloud, and then they recognized from those photos where he was, and they started searching that area, and it was 48 hours before they found him. And he couldn't move because he'd broken his femur. Now obviously if he'd spent £200 on an InReach and then £10 a month just for that area, for that reason, it would have been found in 10 minutes, immediately. So they're a great tool, and I'm sure that it won't be long before phones can, transmit to satellite, and it'll be great. This guy up the top there, he's in a thing called a blizzard bag, and a blizzard bag it's a foil blanket, but it's a special foil blanket. And it's like 3 different layers of foil blanket, stuck together with these elasticated or bits of elastic, and they come in various shapes and sizes. You can get like roby versions where you can like sort of put them on and walk in them with a hood, and you can get these wraps as well for people who are really cold. They're absolutely fantastic. We call them a hypothermia wrap. They're made by Blizzard, and they vacuum pack down to I would say the size of an A4 sheet and about 3 centimeters thick. So you can easily use it like as a sit mat or put it in the back in your swim bag. And it's just, if you get caught out, you're stuck somewhere, that will save your life. A foil blanket won't save your life. It won't do anything. If you've not got any body heat anyway, the foil blanket won't work. So that's a great piece of kit that we carry all the time on all of our trips. And I carry it personally on everything I do. and I've used it a lot. The thing to the right that looks like a balloon is a group shelter, and you can get various different sizes of those. Again, they create like their own climate, so they're a great piece of kit as well. If there's 2, 3, 4, or 5 of you, you can sit in those, create a climate. You can have a break if it's cold and windy and people are getting cold. You can just get inside that, and they're great pieces of kit. Oh, sorry. On the right there, we have the throw bag. The throw bag. We spend a full day teaching throw bag rescue. We do a lot of dry drills, and then we go into like flat water, and then we move it onto moving water. And there's a lot to go through with throwing a throw bag. On the face of it, if you're at the lake and you throw a throw bag to somebody, that's an easy rescue. But as soon as you take it into the water, hitting somebody that's moving and then them grabbing hold of it, and you've been able to anchor at the other end, pendulum them in, and all of the things that are involved in that task is quite tricky, really. Also, ropes can get tangled in people and then get tangled in trees, and then people can drown. So they do have a high risk as well if you don't know what you're doing with them. So a pole is a lot better if you're not trained with a throw bag and you don't know. Then a pole is a really good rescue tool, and certainly we're using poles a lot. We've got these, some of them 15, 17 meter telescopic carbon poles with a buoy and a hook on the end, and we're using those for ice rescue and for lake rescue. And certainly they're brilliant because they don't. There's nothing to get tangled. You don't have to throw it. It's not not really that conditional. The person on the other end just puts their arm through a hook. They don't need to grab hold of a rope, etc. It's a flotation device, whereas the throw bag isn't. So I'd recommend those poles if you're doing a lot of swimming, or if you're part of a club and you want to swim in a canal, or you're swimming locally, then a pole is good. Or if you're doing anything in ice, then they're great. Probably a bit of an extreme slide this, but have a backup plan. Think about what's going on in terms of where everyone's going to end up, or where you're going to end up, and what's your backup plan. And your backup plan might be, right, okay, well, the first eddy on the left hand side, that's where I'm heading for. And if I miss that one, then there's another one on the right hand side, and if I miss that one, then Steve will get me downstream with the throw bag, and that's going to be my planned swim. And then I might do a few laps of that. So they're the kind of backup plans that we might have. And also, backup plan might be your phone, it might be your extra equipment to keep you warm, etc.
And can you just tell us what's an eddy?
Going to come on to hydrology shortly. So
okay,
yeah.
I'll just keep quiet in the background.
If there's time. So whenever we're doing any kind of rescue, there's been loads and loads of fatalities with people tying ropes around themselves, not just in moving water, but also in lakes and streams, lakes and canals. So whenever we attach ourselves to a rope, which is a requirement for doing a rescue, we always use a rescue buoyancy aid, and we always have a releasable harness on that buoyancy aid. And certainly I would prefer to jump in the river and try and rescue someone with a buoyancy aid on, not attached to a rope, if I didn't have the harness. So I would enter the water, not attached to the rope, and try and swim them to the side over tying a rope around me. It's just so dangerous. So just, if you don't have these skills, then don't try and tie the ropes. And a lot of the rescue training that was triggered in 1999 by the fight in water was triggered by an incident that happened with a fireman who went to a lake in Manchester, and they were on scene 20 minutes after a child had disappeared who was doing a rope swing, and one of the guys heroically thought he could see some bubbles, so he stripped off, tied a safe working at height rope around himself, and swam out and started duck diving. And when he got tired, he signaled to the guys to pull him in, and the rope they were using had sank and it had gone under a tree branch, and they pulled him, him in and drowned him underwater because he couldn't release. So, you know, lots of things go wrong with water and ropes. They're best avoided. Another one here, you know, just thinking about, okay, well, I could put a rope across the river as a catching line. And if we do it like we've got at the slide on the right, at 45 degrees to the current, then we'll slide down the rope and we'll end up on the, you know, on the river on the river bank at the downstream end of the rope. Whereas obviously if we put a rope at 90 degrees to the current, we're going to end up stuck in the middle of the river. When we're using ropes in the river again, think about the pendulum effect and the power of the water, and thinking, you know, about how we hold the rope. And like people might hold the rope in coils, and if we start holding ropes in coils, then it can, if it pulls tight, it can wrap around our hands, and then we can get pulled in the river as well. So I just wanted to sort of bring to the, you know, to the sort of the, to everybody what, you know, what dangers there are with ropes and throw bags, because people, it's quite easy to say, oh well, I'll get some safety, I'll get a throw bag, and actually it's, you know, it's definitely, it's a very compromised rescue, and it's certainly something we're not saying is a true rescue. So this is one of our big stresses in the river. If we're moving downstream, if we're getting swept away in the water, you know, so we're not talking about slow moving water that we can wade in. We're talking about, you know, it's pushing us over. Then we need to not be trying to get our feet down to try and stop ourselves from getting swept away, which is kind of the natural thing to do. What we need to be doing is to be keeping our feet up in front of us, and getting into a defensive swimming position to be able to fend off anything that we might hit on the way down. I've got a little swimming video to show you guys, and sorry about the accent, but I think I trawled the internet for some time to try and find the best kind of video for swimming, and I think this kind of sort of shows the best. It's just 3 minutes.
Water is extremely powerful. Don't underestimate it. It can push you over very easily. We never want to stand up in the river, because that might have an opportunity to get our feet caught. So keep your feet up and out of the water until you're in the shallow shoals or the side of the river.
Mistakes, wait, be smart, show you what I mean.
Now, if you're out of your boat and you're swimming, there's two distinct different types of swimming. The first is called defensive swimming. In defensive swimming, we're getting into what's called the nose and toes position. That is, our nose and our toes are up and out of the water. Our feet are out in front of us, just in case we come up towards a rock. We're actually going to use our feet to hit the rock instead of our head. We're almost floating on our back, and we're using our hands out to the side to help us move into a position we want to. The next type of swimming is called aggressive swimming. This time we're actually on our stomach, using our arms and our legs to swim towards where we want to go. Remember, it's called aggressive swimming. So make sure you really get aggressive and swim hard.
Oh man, no me. Listen here. I'm free, let it go.
Now, when we do want to swim aggressively, we actually roll over onto our stomach. And we do that by keeping our feet up and close to the surface of the water. The other way that we can turn over into our swimmer's position is to bring our legs up close to our chest and then roll forward. Either bringing your feet up close to your chest and rolling forward, or rolling over are the only two ways that we want to be able to get into that aggressive swimming position. These two ways will prevent our feet from getting close to the bottom of the river and prevent ourselves from having foot entrapments. Now, if you are swimming with your boat, you want to make sure that your boat is down.
Okay, guys, so hopefully that's given you a good idea of the two techniques that we'd be using to swim in the river. And one of the, in the middle of that sort of video, the guy was swimming quite hard, aggressively, on his front, and he was swimming across the river. And we certainly look at what we call ferry gliding to get from one side of the river to the other, and that's something that's we need to practice with in terms of setting our angle. And we can do that in defensive swimming position as well, and we can use our hands behind us to control our direction. So if we're swimming across the river, if we were to swim across the river at 90 degrees, then we'd end up really far downstream, because obviously the flow is going to take us that way. So if we set ourselves up at about 45 degrees, then the water is going to hit us on the side of our body and push us across the river, which can be really good fun. And catching eddies is really good fun as well. Certainly, obviously that was quite rough white water, but certainly nice small eddies behind rocks. It's really satisfying when you do catch them and get into that shelter. It's really nice.
Ben, can I just ask, we've just had a question about, are there any courses where you can learn to do this sort of stuff? And I've just put a link to your website, rescue3europe.com. But is there anything in particular that you would recommend for the swimmers that are here?
Yeah, there's sort of river safety, like there's a first responder course that we run, which is and then there's also some lower level sort of whitewater courses. I mean, feel free to email me and I can do that. And I certainly think that there's not really anything certainly at the moment set up for river swimming, and it's something that I want to chat to Rescue 3 about. Rescue 3 currently the biggest agency for river safety in the world, and that's who I'm a Rescue 3 instructor. So they put together certification and endorsements, and endorsed training basically, and certainly they've got a huge database as well as a really good reputation for putting out courses. And if we were to develop a river swimming course, then the river swimming course would be developed with hundreds of instructors all over the world. So there'd be it would probably there'd be the best knowledge that would come together to put it together, which would be great. Yeah. But there are, you definitely get a lot from doing just a first responder course. We spend the majority of the day of the first day swimming and doing throw bag work. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. So I'm going to keep going. We're going to talk about river orientation and hydrology. I'm going to go pretty quick through this because there's quite a bit to cover after that as well. So orientation of the river. We're always orientating ourselves if we're running downstream. So the terminology is river left and river right, as if you're running downstream or swimming downstream. And the reason for that is, if I said to you, Ben's been injured on river left, and he's downstream there of the bridge, then the emergency services would know exactly which side of the river to go to, because everyone's been trained to this kind of orientation. Yeah. Kind of already talked a little bit about this, but in terms of factors that affect the volume and the river itself, obviously volume, gradient, which is obviously the contours of the mountain that it's coming from, how steep is it, and that's going to obviously have an effect on the speed, and then anything that's placed in the river, obstacles are going to obviously create hazards and features. That's what we're going to talk about in our hydrology stuff shortly. So the topography of the catchment area is pretty important. What's in that catchment area? And we talked about, reservoirs and dams and such, like any kind of man-made structures that are going to affect the flow. But also we can think about, if it's been really, really dry for a really long period, then the catchment area can get really baked. And then if it rains, we're going to get some intense rainfall on top of that. It'll just run off. I like to think of it like a brand new sponge that you buy from the shop. If you run it under the tap, the water just runs straight off it. But if you squeeze the sponge, then eventually it'll soak up And once that started to soak up, it'll soak up, and then it floods out when it's full, and the ground can do the same. So if you've got, you know, wet ground or damp ground, then it'll just soak up the water, and we'll get what we call a lag time. So the lag time of the river coming up into and swelling can be delayed quite significantly in averse to the rainfall that's happening at that time. So learning that about the catchment area that you're in is pretty important. We measure water in cubic meters per second. That's obviously a square ton of water moving past us every second. And you know, if I said to you, oh, the river Orkey's running today, it's at 10 cubic meters per second, then you know that's a lot of water going past, but you don't have anything to sort of gauge it from, because you don't know what the level of the river Orkey would be at its baseline. So having a knowledge of that is important as well. But certainly turning up at the river and going, oh yeah, we can sort of do this calculation and say, right, the river's running at 7 cumex, and if we're going to come back tomorrow, it's running at 8 cumex. How does that affect what we're doing? Is a good thing. The river, basically, the river force obeys a square law. So it's not just as the river gets, you know, as the river comes up, it doesn't just get, you know, double up and double up in force. It's starting to, it quadruples, and then it triples, and we get 9 times and 10 times the speed, and then 100 times the force. So it's, you know, it's, yeah, 10 times the speed is 100 times the force. So it works completely differently, and that's why how we can start to see things like vehicles and caravans and stuff moving in floodwater. We don't need a lot of water to start, you know, moving big objects around. So here's where it gets quite exciting. So we've got the flow of the river now. I could imagine most people would look at a river, and if it was white water, they probably wouldn't go for a swim. They'd be like, "That's great, you know, that's probably what you want to do, especially if you're just a swimmer and you're not wanting to put on any kind of PPE." Certainly, if there's white water being formed, it means that there's rocks, and you're then going to start having to think about buoyancy aids, impact protection, and helmets and stuff. It's not really what we're after. We're after sort of maybe slow moving water that we can, you know, mosey on down and enjoy some nice scenery and you know, and enjoy a good swim. So the flow itself is affected by friction. We've got friction on the riverbed, and we've got air friction as well. So we end up with this faster pocket of moving water that we can't really see. And we kind of, our legs can end up in that. So we can move quite a lot faster than the river looks that it's like it's going. And also you can see here, as it's coming around the corner, it's kind of offset, that faster moving water's offset. So we might think that it'd be quite cool to come around the outside of a bend, as it were. And then we get a view around the corner quicker. But actually, we're going to be in that faster moving water. And certainly on the outside of bends, we get things like undermining. We can see in this slide, we've got some erosion going on. So there's a lot more hazards on the outside of bends. Whereas on the inside of bends, we get slow moving water, and we get some sort of eddy, which is like a backwater, which will basically, you know, you could get out even if you come around a corner. You want to stick to the inside of the bend as a basic rule. Yeah. This is a helical flow. So again, the friction of the river on the sides of the banks is always wanting to get off downstream. So we end up with these sometimes in you know, certainly in a gorge in higher moving, in sort of higher flow, we'll end up with these huge boils coming up at the side of the river and going downstream. And certainly that can be really hard to get out of the river itself, because you've got these recirculations inside the water, and they can be subsurface as well. So you can quite often you can't see them, especially in our, you know, our dark black water. So it's certainly, you know, worth bearing that in mind and thinking about your backup plan. Like, where's my backup plan? If I can't get out there, you know, is that a hard get out? I need to think about where my next option is, because it might look easy, but actually when you get to it, there might be these helical flows that you can't see, and stopping you from getting out. Yeah. So the water's moving in straight lines downstream, as I said, and the faster moving water's on the outside of bends, slow moving water on the inside of bends, affected by friction. As like a little summary. The inside of the bends are going to have slacker moving water, and we're going to get more shale deposits from the outside of the bend. The outside of the bends are going to have caves, undercuts, potentially unstable trees, and that sort of thing. Eddies are formed by areas of the river that need filling up. Yeah, so we end up with an area that needs filling up because it's come around the corner, and that on the inside of that bend, it needs filling up with water. So the river comes back on itself and it fills up. So we end up with a thing called an eddy line, which runs off the side of the feature that's creating the shelter. And we end up with water moving back upstream in that area to fill it up, which is slack water. Okay, I'll come on to that in a bit more detail shortly. So if there's a rock in the river or an object, we can end up, if there's a rock in the river and an object, then obviously it's a hazard. We can end up tripping over it, or we can get our foot stuck on it. But when we start to add flow, we then get different features. Yeah, so if we get flow downstream, then certainly if the rock's sticking out, then if the water's not tall enough or high enough to go over the rock, then it's got to go around it. Yeah. So firstly, water doesn't compress; it just builds up. It'll build up, and you end up with this cushion wave in front of it, and then it'll slip off around the side. So if you're swimming down stream and you see that there's a rock coming up, and you're like, oh, I don't really want to hit that. I'm gonna get myself into the defensive swim position. I'm gonna get ready to push off it with my feet. As I approach that rock, I'm gonna hit this cushion of water. And certainly sometimes you might not even hit the rock and just hit the cushion of water, and then it'll spill you off to the left or to the right. Likewise, the water's doing that, and then it's going to fill that area behind the rock, and that's how it's creating that eddy. Yeah, and the eddy line itself, or the eddy fence, it's really tight high up, so it's very narrow at the top by the feature. And then as it goes down, it'll split out and V out until both of those eddy lines like merge, and then all the water starts to move off downstream again. We can also get these black or white tongues of water. They're called the downstream V, and they kind of sort of mark a convergence of flow, and you get them into the top of a lot of rapids. The lead into a rapid, and that would be the line that we would take to swim down the rapid, and really good fun place to go. Swim down through these like nice black tongues of water. Quite often, when you get to the end of the tongue of water, there'll be some waves, and those waves aren't dangerous waves. They're normally just energy. So the energy's coming together, the water's speeding up, it's coming together, and then it just explodes, and those waves will kind of surge up and down the river. They're not uniformed waves, and the river's certainly deep there. It's just an explosion of energy, a convergence of flow. If there's no cushion wave on a rock, we end up with a thing called a siphon, probably the swimmer's worst nightmare, going down the plug hole and getting stuck. So how do we spot a siphon? Well, firstly, there's no cushion wave. Secondly, the eddy might look really turbulent. We might end up with a lot of like surging boils behind the eddy, and we certainly get those there's quite a lot of those on the Findhorn in terms of boulders and water going under boulders, and there's also like quite a lot of scoured out holes which have joined, and water goes through them and out. So strainers are anything that's fallen across the river or in floodwater. We've got like armico barriers and hedges and concreted in benches, etc. Hazards to look at, and this is what I was saying about planning. If you swim the river one day, it can be totally different the next. So if you're going to swim a section of river, I would suggest parking at the bottom, walking up, and checking your phone signal, checking the river, make sure it's the same as what it was the last time, or making sure it's what you expect, looking down and checking if there are any hazards, and then sizing up the hazard. Okay, well, this is a river wide strainer. I'm not going to get in the river. I'm going to walk around it. Yeah. A few features here. We've got the cushion wave there at the top of the rock there where the kayaker's paddle is. We've got two really obvious eddy lines, which are quite nice to look at, and that kayak is in perfect sort of setup, ready to catch that eddy. And if I was going to swim into that eddy, I'd be in a similar position because it's quite a hard eddy to swim into. And then on the far left side, we've got that downstream V that I was talking about with a little convergence. So we'll probably all sort of know about stoppers and weirs and of sort of, know that they're dangerous. Hydraulics, waterfalls, they're all like hydraulics or have hydraulics in manner. And that's water coming back on itself. It's a vertical eddy. It's an area that the water needs to refill. So it could be a surface hole, like this one, a surface hydraulic, where we've got this sort of low angle face there, that black water upstream of the kayaker. It's a low angle face. So if I was swimming through there, then that isn't retentive enough to hold me, because the water that's charging through there is carrying on downstream. Whereas if we look at a steeper, drop of a face, then we're going to end up with the water coming full depth and you going full depth, and then there's a chance that you'd surface in this backwash. And certainly in things like uniform weirs and stuff like that are really dangerous and horrible places to swim. And certainly, rescue from this is a high risk rescue as well. So as a swimmer, just being able to identify this stuff and avoid it, don't go in the river near it. Don't take chances. If there is one, I can swim around it. I would just get out and walk around it. And that's kind of the makeup of it. So one of the hardest things to think about is in the backwash, we've got masses of aeration. So the water's coming down, it's exploding back up, and it's really aerated, but we've also got a powerful recirculation. And aeration means a few things. So one, the water's like half as dense as it would be. So if we can't swim in the air, in thin air, otherwise we'd all be a Peter Pan. We can't swim in this water. It's inefficient and really ineffective. So even just trying to keep your head up out of the water is really hard. And also, with the water being less dense, we're nowhere near as buoyant. So even a buoyancy aid doesn't keep you floaty. So if someone's in this environment, then they need as much flotation as you can throw at them. Anything that's there to give them, then it'd be great. And I'm certainly sure that a lot of people would have heard about the incident in Haverfordwest with the stand-up paddleboarders. There was terrible fatalities last year, and that was all based around a weir, as well as some, bad judgment and also some bad techniques that people were talking about. Yeah, different shapes of hydraulics and certainly not all the weirs look like really horrible like that last one. This is a weir on the Trent, and certainly upstream of this, it's just flat grade 1, and you could easily be swimming. There was 18 paratroopers did a river crossing 500 meters upstream of this weir, and 8 of them drowned in that weir in the dark. So and I've been there and trained there. It's an eerie place, but it certainly doesn't feel like it doesn't give you that feeling of it's a drowning place. It's not not like a terrible whitewater grade 5 rapid that you'd think it would be horrendous, but it's a horrible weir. We have a grading system 1 to 6 for whitewater, and I see this as a pain scale, or how likely you are to end up in hospital. But from your point of view as swimmers, I think it's great. We shouldn't really be looking at swimming anything any harder than class 3. In a class 3 rapid, you're having to make maneuvers, and you would definitely have PPE on. I would say that without PPE, grade 2 is okay. But again, you're going to end up potentially, with some aerated water, so you're not going to be as buoyant, and you're going to have to proactively swim around hazards. And so how do we find out what grade things are? Well, there's a website called the Rivers Guidebook, And on that website, there's also an app, I think, so you can download the app, and all of the rivers in the UK are basically, and the world, are on that app. And if you click on that river that you're going to, there'll be a description of the grades and any rapids that are in there and anywhere where there's any hazards. So it's a great resource. There's also guidebooks as well for kayaking, which will give you, and sort of kayak touring as well, which would be sort of the swimmers' descriptions as well. So things like, this River Severn is it's a beautiful open canoe, and there's lots of books based around that, and bigger rivers like Thames and that. And I know there's lots of people swimming in those rivers as well.
And there's it's just come up to 9 o'clock, and there's a couple of people having to log off, and they're saying thank you for the information. But do you want to, for those of you that do need to go, just because we've kind of got to the time there, is there anything you want to pass on now, and then we can carry on with the rest of your presentation?
If people are all right to carry on, I'll just carry on, and they could maybe just watch it. If they're interested, just watch it on the catch up after this. Is that all right? If they've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I've only got sort of hazmat issues and then ice to talk about, really, and a little bit of a summary. So another kind of 15 minutes or so. Yeah,
so folks, everybody that's here that's registered, there's more people here than were registered, so somebody's been sharing the link, but that's fine. Everybody that's registered, I'll send you a link to the recording, and it'll be available for a few days after this. So if you do need to pop off, then that's no bother at all. And thanks very much for coming along. Cool. Thanks, Ben.
Cool. Yeah, so that's hydrology. It's a quick little rattle through that, and normally spend a bit more time looking at different photos and videos and stuff, just to consolidate it. And then obviously from there we would go out onto the river and get in the water and learn how to do it, size it up, look at the flow, think about the current vector and where the river's taking people, where the places are that people are more likely to end up washed up. So as our backup plan, if someone becomes incapacitated, then read the water and think, right, okay, well, they're probably going to end up there. That's where I'm going to stand for my backup plan, rather than being on the wrong side of the river, etc. So think about where the water's taking people outside of bends, as I said, and they might get hung up on shell banks, etc. Cool. We're going to go through some sort of quickly talk about some medical and what we call decontamination considerations for hazmat. Again, think about your size up. In terms of hazmat, we're talking about water pollution, and there's all sorts of different water pollution, isn't there? So and a lot of it we can't see, so it's something that we need to be managing really quite closely. And so obvious things that that if we're working in the river low down in the catchment area, then think about what the time of year it is for farmers spreading muck on the fields. And the silage is full of things like cryptosporidium and stuff like that. And one of the incidents I had was I was on the lower Kent, teaching in Kendal, and the river, and I don't know if the farmer had just spilled a load of silage into the river, or whether or not there was like a thunderstorm and it washed it off the fields, but the river like turned green and stank. And 3 of my clients got ill that day, and we still, as soon as we smelt it, we got off the river, and I sprayed everyone down with decontamination Milton. Basically, I just spray everyone with Milton when they get out of the river, and then use hand gels. So that's my kind of procedure, but it still didn't work. So think about what's happening that day and whether or not there's a chance that the river could get really contaminated and flooded, and then think about where you are in the river, and certainly look on maps. And even the OS map has sewage works marked on the map. So and you can get that information as well on from the Environmental Agency website, where the sewage works are and where they're positioned on rivers. So and certainly if there's a sewage works on a river, then there's sewage going in the river, because a lot of them are just over capacity. So it's certainly worth looking at that. And then also think about, you know, if you're up in the Highlands or, you know, in the higher grounds, certainly in Scotland, we've got really high populations of deer now. They're really out of control. The ticks are horrendous. Like, you know, you can get hundreds of ticks just from taking a walk to your location, and obviously within, you know, ticks carry Lyme's disease and other things. So, you know, managing that kind of thing, and making sure that you have a good search of yourself after you swim is really important to catch that. And if there's any kind of red rings around a tick bite, then go straight to the doctors and they'll treat you with some antibiotics. It's really, you know, really critical that you deal with that. The high population of deer, and certainly an example of that. My partner is she does estate management, and in the area in Glenlivet that she manages for the Crown Estate, they've had to tap water. They've had to basically drive water in lorries to that glen for the last 4 years, because there's such a high level of cryptosporidium because of the amount of deer in the water. So you go to this absolutely beautiful glen. It's got an amazing river in it that's full of beautiful pools, and the water's contaminated. So and it's kind of our fault, you know, because we're not managing livestock properly. So certainly don't think that just because you're in the high mountains and, you know, the water. So think about, you know, in terms of the water sort of purifying itself and needs some aeration. So if you can if you're going to go and do a pool dunk, then think about getting in below a waterfall is a good idea, because then the water's had a lot more aeration and it's seen some UV and stuff, rather than slower moving water and contamination.
That's fascinating, Ben, because you see quite a lot of people posting photos of them in sort of little remote ravines and rivers and stuff, and I hadn't considered the level of potential pollution in these areas.
Yeah, no, it's a shame, isn't it? Real shame. But yeah, I mean, and it's these, you know, the higher grazed areas, like the Cairngorms National Park, which is basically just one big farm for sportsmen, isn't it? No comment. It's really badly, really badly managed because of that. So but yeah, we've got a list of nasties here that most people will have heard of one or another. Leptospirosis is a thing called Weil's disease. It's carried in rats' urine. So and a lot of the time that rats live in rivers, so on the side of rivers. So anywhere where you get sort of stagnant, stationary water, things like canals and the sides of reservoirs, etc., then just avoid that. And certainly wind is good for that sort of thing, because it agitates the water and blows air into it, so it moves it around a lot. And I would definitely be avoiding getting any of this, drinking any of these kind of waters. I wouldn't be drinking anything out of the river, and avoiding it. And certainly trying, thinking about hand gels after. It all became apparent when COVID came along. We didn't know whether or not you should open the shop door with your elbow or with your hand or with a glove on or what. So and if you've ever chopped a chili and done that and then ended up with your face is soon on fire if you don't wash your hands, because you've got chili all over your hands, and then it's cross-contaminated onto your face. So we're constantly touching our faces subconsciously, so just be aware of that when you get out from your swim. And obviously on the right there we've got our other things, which some of them are more appropriate to flood water, things like petrol and oil. We don't often get big spillages like that unless we're in flood water, but there are certainly septic tanks and slurry pits and farmers putting pesticides in the fields and that washing into rivers and stuff, which are all really bad. Yeah. A lot of these nasties on the left there, they're going to present themselves as sort of dysentery, and vomiting. So just, you know, if that's something that happens to you after a swim, then I would go to the doctors and get bloods taken so that, you know, you're not taking any risks, because something like cryptosporidium or giardia or something like that can really affect you, you know, staphylococcus, and really affect you for years, if not, and it can kill you. So, you know, just be mindful of that. We talked about hypothermia on the first day, and Norma was telling us about that. You know, that profound cooling of our body, and certainly something we need to be you know, mindful of. I thought I'd just put that in, keep that in there, because it's something, just a reminder. You know, it's be important to think about the stumbles and mumbles and the fumbles. So after our swim, I just thought I'd put this in kind of towards the end, is something to think about. You know, call in to whoever's sort of keeping an eye out for you. You know, if you said, I'm going to go for a swim, I'm going to be here, and make sure you tell somebody that you're back. You know, like a bit of a late home procedure is important for them as well. You know, like, well, if I'm not back by 7, then can you come and look for me? Whereas, you know, well, hang on, he said it's actually 9 and he's not back. Well, I wonder how long a swim he was going for. So having a little bit of a time sort of on your swims a good idea, and then calling that in is important. Think about your decontamination. So I just talked about that. Think about your rewarming and how you're going to do that, and whether or not you need to, you know, whether it's just take your wetsuit off and put your aerobie on, or whether it's something, you know, that you want to do some sort of chanting at the side of the river, which we tend to like as well. And then something to sort of think about as well is sort of maybe to, you know, like some people who like to post on Facebook a lot, then it's kind of like a diary of everything they've done, isn't it? So it kind of jogs your memory. So taking a pic, I like to take photos on my phone, and I just use those as my kind of like way of reminding me of what I've done on that day. But it's a good thing to do, is to reflect on things like the water level and any physical gauge that you might have. You could take a photo of that, and then, you know, for the next time when you come back, you've got a level to sort of go back to and think about, you know, whether or not it's at a similar level or higher or lower or whatever, and whether you could expect to hit some rocks because it's lower, or expect some waves or whatever, or expect to be moving a bit quicker because of the flow.
Ben, just a quick question. Matt's just asking, is there anything that you can take as a precaution to, in case you do solo things, like any sort of tablet or anything? I know when we used to go paddling, you used to have a can of Coke, but I don't know whether there's any truth in that.
I don't know. Yeah, I was like, I think like Coke does settle your tummy, doesn't it? Because it's just so corrosive. I don't know. I'd rather avoid it, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think there is. I think you just got to keep your fingers crossed and hope you're okay. I mean, I certainly like just flushing things out with water is probably, you know, clean water is probably your best bet. And also, you know, thinking about your swim, and if there is a chance of getting water in your mouth, then do you want that water in your mouth? You know, and is it within your ability to keep your mouth shut? And, you know, the gasp reflex as well, you know, and how that's going to affect you with your swim. And that's what I was saying about entering the water slowly and stuff like that at the start, just to get around that. But I mean, it's one of those things. I can honestly say I've never been ill from the river. I don't, you know, but maybe I'm just used to it. I don't know, but I know a lot of people that have, so just lucky, I think.
Okay, thanks.
And there's definitely medication that you can take, and I got giardia in Nepal actually, so I have been ill from the river, and that's sort of carried by other humans, or you know, decomposing animals and bodies in the water, and I just got some medication and got rid of it quite quickly, some tablets, but yeah, most of these things cured with antibiotic, unfortunately.
Cool. Matt was suggesting whiskey, but you wouldn't suggest that, I'm sure.
No, never. Yeah, maybe. As long as you have enough of it, we'll probably be all right. Switch the bad stomach for a headache. Cool. I thought I'd just touch on ice because people are sort of going into ice, and ice dunking has become a bit of a thing from, I guess, from Wim Hof really, and making it sort of, and mindfully getting that cold exposure is really good for you, isn't it? So there's tons of benefits. But I think that that the ice it gives it a different level, doesn't it, of danger really, and it's certainly something that we need to sort of be really mindful of. So thinking about our own safety is obviously paramount, and enjoying our ice dunk. And we're certainly gonna, we can train ourselves out of a gasp reflex, but the ice cold gasp reflex, I can get in a cold shower every morning and not have a gasp reflex. But if I get in the ice, that is taking my breath away, and that's certainly something not to be complacent about. So thinking about always having someone there with you is certainly, I wouldn't go on my own. And you're more likely to have a medical as well. So you put more strain on your heart when you go into that really cold water. So just thinking about, has not all been invincible, and other things can go wrong. So certainly with our size up, a few rules: don't go into a river that's frozen. So obviously the river might look flat and calm, but we've got that laminar flow that we can't see. We've got helical flow. And the water's moving underneath the ice. So if you fall through the ice, then you're likely to disappear. Yeah. And certainly, if we're entering the water or entering the ice, it's always better to enter it from the shore. So break the ice at the shore. Don't walk out onto what we call the ice mantle, and then break the ice in the middle of the lake. And I'll come on to ice holes in a minute. Always stay when you're swimming, stay within your own depth. And again, you can do that if you know the gradient of a beach, and just stay in your own depth. Don't get out your depth, and that way you can always stand up. Enter the water slowly, don't jump in, because obviously we're then putting ourselves at a massive strain on our body. And then obviously know your time limits. And remember, set that alarm, and make sure that that your own limits, what your own limits are. And I would say that there's not really any much more benefit in going into ice for more than 3 minutes, unless you're trying to prove something. But the actual benefits of it in terms of physically have been proven that 3 minutes is fine. You don't need to go for 10 minutes and get super cold. You're just putting loads of stress on your organs. So I think 3 minutes is a good time to sort of call it a day and get out. But somebody else watching this might have a different idea. I don't know, or might have more theory on it. It'd be good to know. But that's certainly my thoughts on it. I think, incapacitation, and that sort of thing.
That's certainly
putting ourselves out is really, really critical.
That's certainly what Professor Mike Tipton said, Ben, when he came on to a webinar with us last year. He said there's no sort of physical benefit after 3 minutes. You get all of the benefit in that short amount of time. Oh, hello, you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I dropped out there. There's a thing called the 1-10-1 rule, which came from a professor in America, and it says it's 1 minute if you fall through the ice, and then 10 minutes of trying to get out the ice, and then you've got 1 hour before you're profoundly hypothermic. And I think that it's good food for thought for us in terms of swimmers. In terms of, if you think about how long you can actually survive in there, everybody's different. And if you look this up on the internet, it's a bit of a myth. It's just something that somebody said on a chat show, a professor said on a chat show, really. But I think it does give us, we've got that gasp reflex. Sometimes it lasts 30 seconds for some people, sometimes it lasts up to 5 minutes for others. So it can always, it can vary, but we do have a time where we don't, we do become incapacitated. where our body starts to shut down and we can't hold on to ropes, can't hold on to poles, and we can't rescue ourselves. And that's certainly something that we need to be sort of working within our own parameters in terms of our swim. So if we're going to sort of think about going in a hole, then, and we teach ice rescue and how to sort of get people out of the ice and vehicles and skidoos and stuff like that. So, certainly something that we've done quite a lot of is, getting a chainsaw and cutting holes on the ice and going in the water, and also walking out onto the ice into areas that are thin and falling through it. And I'd say it's not as scary as you think, but there's a lot of techniques involved in getting out, and getting out's actually fairly simple if you've practiced it, and you've got the right kit on, and it's not taking you by surprise. So it's all something, again, it's similar to the throw bag, where it's just about a matter of having got used to and learned a few techniques, and having the right equipment on to be able to deal with it. So there's a few little sort of questions there for thoughts I've got there. So we say that 10 centimeters of black ice is enough to hold people on ice. So if you're going to go out onto the ice, then you should be sort of depth checking, and we use an ice screw. It's just what climbers use, so you can drill into the ice. We use a 25-meter ice screw, centimeter ice screw. So if you've got varied ice, if there's bubbles in the ice, or if there's white ice, so snow and then black ice, then 20 to 25 centimeters is a good depth for being strong enough to move out on. You want to cut a really big hole in the ice if you're going to cut a hole to swim in. So don't just make a hole that's big enough for your body to go through, because you'll struggle to get out of it. You need to make a big hole and get rid of any floating ice, push that underneath the ice mantle. The ice mantle will only be at the water level, so you can just get any ice that you've broken, push it underneath, and then you've got a nice little pool area. And make sure your buddy's there and he's got something to hold on to, or she's got something to hold on to. So, an ice spike or an ice screw that you've used, or for traction, something like that. And then you can basically, if you've got enough support on the ice mantle to hold somebody, they can sit on the edge of the ice like a swimming pool, basically hold on to whatever they're using for traction, and then help each other out. And we would always go for this Roman handshake that I've got down the bottom right there. And then, however tempting it is, don't go underwater, I would say. Getting your head wet is a different game, really, in terms of cold.
I think we've lost you, Ben.
No, I'm just flicking through some slides. I'm just talking. I got sick of talking.
There's just doing that. There's just a question Catherine was asking: what's the difference between black ice and white ice?
Yeah, so white ice is basically any ice that's got. So your black ice would be the ice that you get to put in your glass of whiskey. It's completely clear and it looks black because you're looking through it. You're looking into the water. And that's the strongest ice because there's no air in it at all. Whereas white ice would be a combination of air bubbles and maybe snow. So it might freeze, then snow, and then that snow might melt and then freeze again, and you end up with these different layers of ice. So it's never as strong as the black ice. Yeah, it's also called bullet ice as well. This is what we call an open lead, where a river that you're swimming in or a river that you might be in will start to freeze up, and it'll freeze up in the slower moving areas. So the places where you want to get out, like the inside of bends where the water's not moving as quick, and then it'll start to freeze on the outside of the bend if it gets colder, and we'll end up with these like basically overhangs of ice everywhere. So it's really hard to get out of the water. Eventually those overhangs join in the middle and we end up with what we call an open lead. So this is an open lead of water moving into a closed off area of river. So it's like super dangerous. You could end up swimming, you know, if you fell in the water there, went through the ice at the side of it, you then end up getting swept down and then underneath the ice. Not nice. So avoiding any kind of moving water in the river when there's ice is important. Right, that's kind of brings us to the end of the talk, really. I just put there as philosophy, you know, think about what we've talked about tonight. You know, have fun and be safe, but you know, there's practice, build yourself up slowly. If you're going to get in the river, just get in, you know, find a nice beach to enter, and you know, some nice mellow moving water, and try some ferry gliding backwards and forwards in an aggressive and a defensive way. Plan some short journeys, and you know, if there's a small area, like I have my kids in the river quite regularly, and we just go to one rapid and I put them in at the top and they float down and they just start doing laps of the rapid and they start messing about, and that's the, you know, the best ways to train and practice. Obviously gives you the experience to make the judgment calls to keep yourself safe, really. So yeah,
that's brilliant, Ben. Thank you very much, mate. That's been fascinating, and a huge amount of really useful information in there. Quite a lot to digest, I think. Some lovely comments coming through from people in the chat there, if you want to have a look. But thank you very much for that. I'm going to end the recording, and then we'll just hang on. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. But otherwise, we'll send the recording out. It'll be available for you to watch for a couple of